You have to go back to when the Pegwas-Selkirk Treaty was signed. This was in July 1817. Lord Selkirk really wasn't supposed to be Lord Selkirk. The 5th Earl of Selkirk was the youngest of 5 brothers. So normally he would not have inherited the title. But his 4 brothers died, and he was the only one left living. But during his lifetime, he was not educated like he would be going to the title. He had a very liberal education. So when he came into this amazing wealth that went with the title, he had a pretty philanthropic outlook on life. And he was very conscious of the state that the Highlanders were in when they were asked to move off the land, so that the lords and people who had the landowners could run sheep on them. So all these crofters had to have a place to go. Some of them were going into the cities like Edinburgh and Glasgow and even London. But in his case, with his wealth, he said, well, maybe I can get them to come over to the colonies. They came to Canada. So he established 3 colonies or efforts for the Scottish and Irish settlers. One was in the Maritimes in Prince Edward Island. The second one was in Ontario, and the third was, of course, in Red River. So there was a sort of a difference of opinion. I guess that's the kindest way to say it, between the fur traders and the settlers. The fur traders were threatened because these settlers were coming in and they're going to be agriculture, and they thought that they would destroy the buffalo, because the buffalo was very important to the fur trade. It was the sort of the meat and potatoes for the traders and the voyageurs and the others who would be traveling out over the land, because no grocery stores, you had to have something to eat, and the pemmican that was made from the buffalo meat was the staple. So for the first few years, they were scaring the settlers, and Chief Pegwas, who basically lived about the area where we're sitting, north to the mouth of Netley Creek, they befriended the settlers and helped them through those times. And then Lord Selkirk himself came to Red River in the summer of 1817 to sort of calm things down between the settlers and the traders. Because what he had done is with his great wealth, he got control of the Hudson's Bay Company with his investments. And then he persuaded the company to give him a block of land in southern Manitoba, which he called Assiniboia. And that was going to be the land that he wanted for his settlers. It was a big tract of land, basically all of southern Manitoba, well into the Dakotas, and maybe touching in on a little bit of Saskatchewan. And when he came here, he realized that he had a responsibility to enter into a treaty with the indigenous population. He had to follow the principles laid out in the Royal Proclamation of 1763. What that proclamation did was it defined Indian country. Basically, the king said, all land west of the Appalachian Range is Indian land. And the only way, and wherever the land is occupied by Indians, they were deemed to possess it. So today we don't say Indian, we say First Nations, but we've gone through a whole range of different names. But in those days, the word that they used was Indian. And there was a group of then Indians, now First Nations, gathered at Niagara and signed the Treaty of Niagara in 1794, which basically accepted the Royal Proclamation of 1763. And the last provision, or one of the major provisions of the Royal Proclamation, was that the only way that Indian land could be given up is by way of a surrender or a treaty, by way of a treaty with the Indians and the Crown. So when Selkirk came here, he said, I've got to get the agreement of the First Nations or the Indians here to get the land. So what he was able to do, he was able to get the help of Peguis, Chief Peguis, who also brought in 4 other chiefs. So there were 5 chiefs who signed this 300-word treaty with Lord Selkirk, which basically defined the land that the settlers would occupy. It was basically 2 miles on either side of the river, the Red River and the Assiniboine River, running from roughly where we are now, south to the Forks and beyond to the border of the United States, and west on the Assiniboine River to Brandon or wherever it was. So that was the territory that the settlers would be restricted to. In other words, what that treaty did was created a reservation for the settlers. All the rest of the territory was still to be deemed the land of the chiefs that signed that treaty. So as we jump forward to 100 years, over time, Lord Selkirk passed away very, about 3 years after he signed the treaty. He had tuberculosis, I believe, and he died in southern France. And things happen, okay? The Riel resistance of 1870 came along. It's put down by people from the East. Canada is created in 1867. They don't own this territory. So they buy the rights that the Hudson's Bay Company had under their charter for all of the land that drained into Hudson's Bay, basically all of Western Canada. But they're stuck with this idea of the 1763 proclamation now, where they have to treat with the Indians to get the land. So they enter into a series of what we call the numbered treaties. Treaty number 1 being signed in 1871 at Lower Fort Garry, and basically there's 6 bands that signed that treaty, and that solidifies all the lands that would have been Hudson's Bay into the ownership of Canada, and allows Canada to establish the provinces of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, etc.